When I left Axis Consultancy, I thought I was closing the door on a nightmare. My manager, Graham, had always been the kind of man who smiled for clients but sneered at his team. For 3 years I tolerated his subtle insults, his credit-stealing habits, and his passive-aggressive comments like, "You're not quite senior enough to handle that." When I finally handed in my resignation, he looked up from his desk, half smiling. "Good luck, Rennie," he said. "Let's hope your next boss likes overconfident analysts." I brushed it off. The new company, Lingcrest Financial, had a senior strategy opening my dream job. The interviews went great. I felt electric, sharp, confident, finally valued. Then, the recruiter called with a pause too long to be good news. "Renee, your interview was exceptional," she said softly. "But your reference from Axis, it raised concerns." My stomach dropped. "Graham?" She hesitated. "He mentioned you had issues following instructions and struggled with deadlines. I'm sorry." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, stunned. All those years of loyalty, those nights staying late to fix his mistakes, and this was his repayment? For days, anger gnawed at me. But underneath it all, a sharper instinct woke up, something colder than outrage. If Graham thought his reference could bury me, he'd underestimated how quietly I could dig graves of my own. I didn't know it yet, but my revenge would start with a phone call from a company he didn't even know I'd join. 3 months later, I was unpacking boxes in my new office at Hallstrom & Reed, a massive logistics consultancy. I'd landed the job through a different recruiter, one who didn't require a reference from Axis. The irony? Hallstrom was Axis's biggest client. On my second week, I sat in on a meeting about restructuring vendor contracts, and Axis was one of them. My pulse raced as I read the line. Contract review. Axis Consultancy pending renewal Q3. I kept my face neutral, but inside, fire burned steady. Every email Graham had written to undermine me, every forgotten credit he'd taken, every manipulation, it all came rushing back. I didn't need to shout or expose him publicly. All I had to do was become essential here, climb fast, and make myself the person whose signature mattered on that renewal. I began showing up early, volunteering for the toughest data accounts, and learning everything about Axis's pricing models, ones I had helped design years ago. I knew their flaws, their shortcuts, their fake cost savings. When I presented my first proposal to the executive team, they were impressed. My new boss, Clara, leaned forward and said, "You've got a sharp sense for inefficiency, Rennie. I like that." If only she knew how personal my sense of inefficiency really was. That night, I opened an old notebook from my Axis days. Inside were all the cost discrepancies Graham had told me to ignore. Fraud, manipulation, lies. And the perfect tools for revenge. By month 4, I was running numbers on vendor contracts and finding patterns that hinted at overbilling, especially from Axis. In the next operations meeting, I kept my tone professional as I said, "Some of our legacy vendors are showing consistent variances in their billing ratios. I'd recommend a light audit, just to ensure compliance." Clara frowned thoughtfully. "Which vendors?" I clicked to the slide. The Axis logo appeared first. "Their last 3 billing cycles don't align with our actual deliverables," I said calmly. "We may be paying for unused hours." Clara looked intrigued. "Good catch. Run a deeper analysis, but keep it quiet." Exactly what I wanted. Over the next few weeks, I compiled every suspicious figure I could find, cross-referencing emails, client reports, and invoices. My late nights weren't about vengeance anymore, they were about strategy. When I sent my report to Clara, she called me in the next morning. "Renee, this is serious," she said. "Axis might be double charging us. We'll be reviewing all current contracts, including theirs." I nodded, hiding the flicker of satisfaction beneath a mask of professionalism. My phone buzzed later that day, a message from Graham. "Heard you're at Hallstrom, hope no hard feelings. Business is business?" Oh, there were feelings, all right, but they weren't his kind of business. Soon, he'd find out what it felt like when business decided he was the liability. The deeper I dug into Axis's invoices, the worse it got. Their consulting hours were padded with non-existent meetings, and some deliverables had no attached client records. I recognized the same spreadsheet template I'd built 2 years ago, except now, My formulas were overwritten to hide inflated totals, and there it was again, Graham's name in the authorization logs. He'd been signing off fake work for profit using the savings from unpaid overtime and staff terminations to inflate his performance bonuses. I remembered how he used to brag, "Finance loves me because I make the numbers look good." Now I had proof that he didn't just look good, he'd cooked the books. Still, revenge couldn't be sloppy. If I blew this too early, he'd cover his tracks, so I laid low, letting Clara think I was still conducting a routine vendor efficiency review. Meanwhile, I quietly requested historical contracts from procurement, under the pretense of benchmarking performance. My heart raced as each PDF landed in my inbox. There it was, the year-end summary Graham had once forbidden me to view. He'd shaved 12% of reported hours from his team's timesheets, claiming they were non-billable, then pocketed that margin through falsified bonuses. All that overtime he denied us, he'd converted into his own salary. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not because of spite, but because I realized the scale of what was about to happen. If I did this right, it wouldn't just be my revenge. It would be justice for every junior analyst he'd exploited. The audit team was about to open their investigation, and I'd make sure Axis was first on their list. When the internal audit team scheduled their random review of vendor relationships, I pretended to be surprised. Graham, however, wasn't pretending. Within a week, Axis executives were scrambling to justify their financials. I caught wind of his panic through a LinkedIn post. "Challenging week, transparency builds trust." Translation: he was sweating bullets. Meanwhile, I had lunch with the audit lead, Samuel, who casually asked, "You used to work with Axis, right? Anything we should know?" I met his gaze and said carefully, "Let's just say their reports have a history of creative accounting. Check the variance on their Q2 billing." That was all it took. Within days, I saw the tremors ripple through both companies. Emails flew back and forth between compliance officers, and Axis's tone turned defensive. They tried to blame clerical oversights. But Samuel didn't buy it. He asked for timesheet backups, the ones I knew didn't exist. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. Clara summoned me to her office, her expression unreadable. "Renee," she said, "your findings triggered something much bigger than we expected." Axis's director of finance admitted discrepancies under review. My pulse quickened. "They're suspending the vendor contract pending investigation," she continued. "And their COO just called they're launching an internal probe. You might have saved us millions." Saved them and buried Graham. I left her office, heart pounding with a mix of victory and restraint. Because this wasn't over yet. Graham didn't know I was behind it. But soon, he would. The moment his job went up in flames, I'd make sure he knew exactly who lit the match. The fallout came fast. 2 weeks later, a quiet email hit my inbox from an old Axis coworker. "Graham's been put on leave. They're saying compliance irregularities. You didn't hear it from me." I sat there, staring at my screen, emotions tangled between triumph and disbelief. For years, he'd held my career hostage with his arrogance, and now, karma had arrived in a tailored suit. That night I went home and poured a glass of wine, replaying every moment he'd belittled me. Every "you're not leadership material." Every "maybe next quarter." Gina. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. "Rennie?" His voice, cold, tense. "Did you have something to do with this audit?" I almost laughed. "Me? I'm just an employee doing my job, Graham. If your numbers didn't add up, maybe you should take that up with HR." Silence. Then he hissed, "You've made a powerful enemy." "Funny," I said, my voice steady. "So have you." I hung up, and that was the last time I ever heard his voice. 3 days later, Axis lost its contract renewal. Hallstrom and Reed officially terminated their services, and I signed the offboarding approval myself. The woman he'd called overconfident had just written the final line of his career obituary. But what I didn't expect was that his downfall would open a door I never saw coming, one that would test whether revenge could truly be satisfying. The news hit the corporate circuit like a thunderclap. Graham Porter was terminated effective immediately. No announcement, no farewell email, just a sterile internal memo. "Following the results of a compliance review, we are restructuring our vendor relationships." But everyone knew. In our industry, gossip travels faster than policy updates. Recruiters whispered about ethics violations, and Axis's once polished image began to crumble. Clients started withdrawing proposals, citing trust concerns. I should have felt pure satisfaction, but I didn't, not yet, because Graham still had no idea how deep my revenge ran. You see, months before the audit, I had joined Hallstrom's new ethics committee, the same one that approved future vendors. That meant any chance of Axis regaining our business had to go through me. And every week, their desperate reps sent updated proposals, discounted renewals, and corrected statements. I rejected them all professionally, discreetly, but decisively. My justification was airtight. Vendor integrity compromised, recommend termination. Inside, though, I remembered every time Graham used those exact words against employees he didn't like. Underperforming, not a cultural fit. Now, those same terms were the reason his firm was blacklisted. One night, I received an email from Axis's new acting CEO, polite, pleading, "We'd appreciate an opportunity to rebuild trust. Is there any feedback you could share on what went wrong?" I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, slowly, I typed, "It wasn't the numbers that failed you. It was the leadership." And with one click, I sent it the truth, disguised as diplomacy. What I didn't know was that Graham wasn't done yet. He was about to make one last desperate move to save himself, and drag me into it. 2 weeks after his firing, my LinkedIn inbox lit up. Anonymous messages. "Careful who you trust. Heard you threw your old boss under the bus. People say you manipulated the audit to get promoted." The tone was too familiar, vindictive, desperate, cowardly. It was Graham. He'd started contacting my former coworkers, spinning a story that I'd engineered the audit to advance my career. The whispers grew louder, spreading through mutual contacts and even reaching my HR manager. I felt the old anger boiling, the same kind he once provoked in me when I was powerless under him. But now, I wasn't powerless. I documented every message, screenshot, and timestamp. Then I reached out to a friend in Axis's HR department, someone who owed me a favor. Within 24 hours, she confirmed it. Graham had used a personal email account tied to his LinkedIn page to spread the rumors. Dumb move. His messages were traceable. I compiled everything into a single confidential report and sent it to Axis's legal counsel. 2 days later, Graham's profile vanished from LinkedIn. His name scrubbed from the company website. The whispers stopped overnight. Apparently, he'd violated his severance agreement's non-disparagement clause, a costly mistake that would force him to forfeit his payout. When I heard that, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Revenge wasn't just about humiliation anymore. It was about poetic symmetry. He tried to destroy my reputation. Instead, he destroyed his own again. But I wasn't done yet. There was one last card to play, the one that would make him remember my name every time he opened his inbox. Months passed. I'd moved up to senior compliance strategist, overseeing the same vendors Graham once managed. Then, one crisp Monday morning, a major opportunity crossed my desk. Axis Partners had been shortlisted by a global retail client, Bravura Incorporated, one of the largest accounts in our network. The irony hit like a thunderbolt. Bravura's CFO was now a close ally of mine, someone who valued my judgment, and their final vendor recommendations came straight to me for review. So, I did what any meticulous strategist would do. I prepared a comparative analysis. Axis didn't stand a chance. Their proposal was padded, their ethics rating flagged from our previous audit, and their lead consultant, a certain Graham Porter, listed as a contractor. I called Bravura's CFO personally. "Between you and me," I said, "I'd advise extreme caution with Axis. Their internal compliance is unstable. Multiple former employees have raised concerns." She trusted my word implicitly. Within 48 hours, Axis was disqualified from the bidding process. That single contract, worth nearly $6.5 million annually, would have saved their collapsing firm. Instead, it was gone. And the best part? They didn't even know it was me who'd pulled the string. As I walked out of the office that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Closure. Not the angry kind, the earned kind. Still, part of me wondered, when revenge ends so perfectly, what happens next? 6 months later, I received a letter. No return address, just my name, Rene Sinclair, written in shaky cursive. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You won. I lost everything. I hope you're proud. G. Porter. I stared at it for a long moment, not with guilt, not with triumph, but with understanding. He'd built a career on power games, manipulation, and greed, and in the end, all it took was his own behavior reflected back at him. My revenge hadn't been loud. It wasn't public humiliation or sabotage. It was quiet, surgical, inevitable, like justice whispered through policy and professionalism. That was the real satisfaction, knowing that integrity outlasted deceit. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, right beside my first business card from Axis. A reminder of where I started, and how far I'd come. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't need to roar. Sometimes, it just needs to end the story with silence.
Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed this, go watch the one on the left, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more tales of triumph over injustice and a saga of ultimate revenge.